Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It is God's gift to us that we have such wonderful people in our community. And
It certainly is. It
yeah, well,
certainly is.
so welcome everyone to the 6:30 Zoom with the Rabbi, and welcome to the new
Rabbi.
year.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, there's Jeff and Susan. I want to thank you so much for sponsoring the Taste of Kiddush in honor of your wedding anniversary. It's so nice. Thank you for your generosity. All the best.
Thank you.
So we don't have the 3 chapters a day anymore. That was finished when we concluded the
Yom Kippur.
Yeah, the day of Yom Kippur. We don't have the shofar anymore. So we're down to the mitzvah of the day. And that's the Rebbe wanted very much that everyone should learn and study and just at least know what is the mitzvah of that day. And that connects us with millions of Jews all over the world who are learning the mitzvah of the day. So we got 2 mitzvahs today. We have one mitzvah, which is negative 356. And that's the mitzvah of, remember we talked the other day about the mitzvah of divorce, like, we learned about marriage, and then if it doesn't, God forbid, work out, then you have to go through the divorce as the Torah prescribes the method through which the divorce should be executed. So there's a law that if you divorce your wife and both of you decide that, you want to give it another shot and you feel that you made a mistake and you want to get remarried, you can. But if your ex-wife married someone else and that person either passed away or divorced your wife, then the first husband is not able to remarry her. That's the law in the Torah. Once she's married to someone else, the first husband can't take her back. That's negative 356. It means that you can't remarry your ex-wife. Then we have positive 216. What's positive 216? That's called the levirate marriage. That is, if a husband passed away, unfortunately, and there were no children in the marriage, no boys, sons or daughters, so then any brothers of the husband who passed away, of the deceased, is obligated to marry the widow of his brother. That's only if they both want to get married. Let's say they don't particularly care for each other. So then there's a certain ceremony that they don't have to get married, called chalitza. Maybe that might be one of the laws coming up. But positive 216 is the law of the levirate marriage, that the brother is the first one to step up to marry his brother's widow and name the child after the deceased. Okay, so guess what? Guess what holiday is coming up? It's not Purim, it's not Hanukkah, and it's not Passover and Shavuos. I know it's not Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It is the holiday of Sukkot, a very colorful holiday and a very joyous holiday. And as a matter of fact, every holiday, when you say the prayer, you describe the holiday when we daven. Like the holiday of Shavuos, we say the time of the giving of our Torah. When you pray during Passover, you insert the prayer, the time of our exodus from Egypt. What do you say by Sukkot? The time of our rejoicing. Now, why is Sukkot called? All the holidays are holidays of rejoicing. Why is Sukkot specifically recognized and described as Man Simchoseinu, the time of our rejoicing? Because in a very physical sense, there's more than one reason. In a very physical sense, it's because when the Jewish people lived in Israel, that was the time of the ingathering of all the produce. That was the end of summer. Sukkot always comes in the fall. So during the summer, the farmers worked very hard. And then at the end of the summer, when fall had come along, by that time, all the wheat was harvested, all the barley, all the produce, all the fruits and vegetables, everything was, and everybody's barn and everybody's storage houses of food were all filled to capacity. And everybody was rejoicing and everybody was thanking God for the blessing of all the produce. And that's what's called the time of rejoicing. But on a deeper sense, it comes right after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Now, what happened to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is when we stood before God in judgment, and God was judging us, and hopefully favorably, and hopefully wrote us down in the book of life. So we are so certain that God wrote us down in the book of life that we're going to rejoice right after Yom Kippur. A few days after Yom Kippur comes the holiday of Sukkot, and we're rejoicing. It's like a person that's on trial and comes out from the courtroom victorious. And therefore, because of that, it's another reason why it's called the time of our rejoicing. Now, why do we sit in the sukkah? And what exactly is a sukkah? Well, the Torah tells us a command that on this day, on the 15th of Tishrei, which is coming up this Shabbos, Jewish people are commanded to build a sukkah, and I'll soon explain what a sukkah is, and they should dwell in the sukkah for 7 days. Today we do it 8 days, but in Israel it's 7 days. And then the Torah says, why? Because I want you to remember that when I took the Jewish people out of Egypt, and they traveled in the wilderness in the desert, they were in a sukkah. And when they were traveling, it's either, there's two opinions what God means by the sukkah. A sukkah could mean some sort of a tent. And the Jewish people lived in tents. In other words, when they were walking, they were walking. But when they would set up camp, when they would stop the walk or at night, they would set up their tents and sleep in the tents and then continue their walk. So the sukkah is pointing to the tents that the people used in the desert. They had no choice. There was no, when you're traveling and you're walking in a wilderness and desert, you don't have, in those days, there was no hotels or motels on the way. Another opinion is, which is the more widespread opinion, is that God is referring to the clouds. The clouds were like a covering. A sukkah means a covering. So the clouds covered the Jewish people, and the clouds didn't just give them shade, but it protected them from wild animals in the wilderness. It leveled the ground. They should be able to walk. They didn't have to walk up and down hills and mountains. The main thing was the comfort of the shade from the heat of the sun. So God says, I want all the generations to remember how the Jewish people traveled when they left Egypt. Now, what makes a sukkah kosher? Well, it has to have 4 walls, or at least 3 walls, and the walls have to be solid walls. You can't take a sheet or a blanket and hang it up and thereby call that the walls of the sukkah. It has to be a solid wall that doesn't flap back and forth in the wind. Now, what the main thing of the sukkah is the covering, because that's why it says sukkah means a covering. The main part of the sukkah is the covering. What should the covering be made out of? Well, we're trying to do something which is going to symbolize the clouds. Now, clouds are natural, they're not man-made. So you have to have something which is natural. You can't cover with plastic or other things that are man-made. It has to be something natural. It also has to be something that grows from the ground and yet is detached from the ground. The rabbis learn out from various wordings in the Torah how the Torah is commanding us to use as the covering things that grow from the ground, which means branches. Many people use branches of evergreen trees. Many years we use corn stalks. You can use anything that grows from the ground. The most popular thing today is bamboo sticks, because bamboo sticks, other coverings, branches of different types of trees, like especially evergreen trees, where the green part of the evergreen doesn't get dried out, and that's a good covering. But You can use it 1 year, and the next year, obviously, you have at the end of the sukkahs, you got to throw it out. But bamboo sticks, people use from year to year. I've had my bamboo sticks for many, many years. And of course, there are things that grow from the ground and they're detached. So therefore, you can't build a sukkah under a tree and say, well, I got the sukkah covered by the branch of the tree because it's connected to the ground. It has to be detached from the ground, like a cloud is not connected to the ground. Now, what do we have to do in the sukkah? In the sukkah, we eat. The most important thing in the sukkah is to eat. All the meals that we have, you can eat any food that is just called a snack, like fruit, any drinks, except wine. You could eat out of the sukkah. You want to have an apple? Out of the sukkah. You want to have, you want to drink a glass of water or a glass of juice? You want to have fish, meat, eggs, anything which is not grain. There's not bread. It's not matzah. It's not cookies. It's not cake. It's not pretzels. It's not made from any type of grain or flour. That can be eaten out of the sukkah. Once you have something which is a grain, which is and made with flour, then you have to eat that in the sukkah. And of course, wine has to be in the sukkah. We want to drink wine because that's called the main part of the meal. So, many people have a custom that that we not only eat in the sukkah, but we spend as much time as we can in the sukkah. Some people even sleep in the sukkah. There are some people that will, if they have a class, a study session, they're going to half hour, they're going to study some Torah, they'll go in the sukkah. The Torah wants us to make that the sukkah should be our home. This temporary dwelling should be our home. Now, how much covering do you have to put on? You have to put on enough covering where you have more shade than sunlight. If there's more sunlight coming in than shade, then it's not a kosher sukkah. Now, what about, is there a limit? Can I pack on a lot of, bamboo sticks, evergreens, corn stalks, and make it a, if the rain can't come through, then it's not a kosher sukkah because you might as well be sitting in your house. It has to be something temporary. And the rabbis describe temporary as where the rain can come through. So those are some of the laws of sukkah. And as the days go by, the next 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to discuss all the laws that we have to know about a sukkah. We're also going to discuss about the 4 kinds, the lulav esrog and the hadassim and aravis, a very important mitzvah to do on sukkahs. But I want to finish, with a story that a person's life was actually saved by sitting in the sukkah. The story goes back in Russia, where the communist regime was very, very big on erasing Judaism from Russia. And they banned all kinds of observance. And this man, who was a very religious man, and he was very devoted to the community. He tried secretly to teach children Torah. He would make a bris. Everything had to be done secretly that the government shouldn't find out, the KGB shouldn't find out. Of course, when the holiday of Sukkot came along, he wanted to make a sukkah. Well, obviously, you build a sukkah, your neighbors are going to see it. He had to build a sukkah that nobody could see that it's a sukkah. According to law, a sukkah which is big enough for just one person to get in there is a kosher sukkah. Has to be big enough for a person to fit in, at least most of the person. If your feet are dangling out, but your head and your body is in the sukkah, it's kosher. He built a small sukkah, and he built it behind the bushes in his backyard, and you couldn't see it. Even if you walked right past it, you wouldn't see it. It was surrounded by bushes, and the top was covered with some cut off branches. And he comes home from shul the first night of Sukkot. He walks, tells his wife, obviously he would be the only one sitting in the sukkah. There wasn't room for more than one person. And he sits in the sukkah, and his wife brings him his a meal, brings him from challah and some fish, whatever he was eating. And she goes back in the house, and there's a knock on the door. She opens up the door, and she sees it is people from the KGB. And they said, "We have been watching your husband the last couple of months, and we have enough evidence to arrest him. And we know that he has been teaching children Torah. He has been performing circumcisions and doing other things against the government, and he's under arrest. Now, we know he's home because we were outside for the past hour, and we saw him come into the house." She said, "Maybe you saw him come in, but did you also see him leave? Because he's not home." They said, "What do you mean he's not home? We saw him go in." She says, "Yeah, but you might have dozed off or turned around or something, and you didn't see him leave because he's not home. Come inside and look for him." They walked inside. They went through the whole house. They walked out in the backyard. They looked around. They couldn't find him, and they left. So she waited for a while to make sure that they left, and then she went out to tell him what had happened, that because he was sitting in the sukkah, they couldn't find him, and they wanted to arrest him, and who knows, she would probably never have seen him again, either sent to Siberia or executed. So he waited until it was 2 a.m. He sat there all for hours. He was afraid to go in the house, afraid to leave. And once they got that time of the middle of the night, when he was sure that they were not standing around anymore, he ran to a friend's house down the street, and they hid him. And he secretly, in the course of the next couple of days, made his way out of Russia. And a few weeks later, his wife also made it out of Russia, and they ended up in the land of Israel. So here you have a couple that he for sure was saved only because he sat in the sukkah. Sometimes we never know the power of a mitzvah. A mitzvah can be so powerful that it actually protects us without even realizing it. So I just want to wish everyone a good evening. Thank you so much for zooming in. May God bless you all. See you tomorrow at the 6:30 Zoom with the Rabbi.